Welcome back, Year 9, to your second lesson this week. We are now starting our next topic, what was the turning point for Allied victory in World War II? So today, we're going to look at what Blitzkrieg was. So the first part, we're going to look at what was Blitzkrieg and the countries it affected. We're going to understand how Poland and France were affected, and then assess the success of the Blitzkrieg tactic. If you take a second now to read the key words before starting. So our first task, we need to know what Blitzkrieg was. On the screen you have a map. All the red dots tell you the countries that Germany was able to conquer at the start of World War II. So you can see Russia, Poland, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, France. All these countries were conquered. And today we're going to look at how. So the first task, you're going to watch the video and complete the true-false task. If you're doing secured, you're going to complete the developing and then correct the false statements. And mastered, you're going to think about why do you think Europe was so easily conquered by the Nazis?
In the 1930s, Nazi Germany was preparing for war.
Our British cousins wrote the book on how to do this. And promptly put it on the shelf because they didn't have the money. And the Germans read it, and guess what? They picked it up and ran with it.
At the outbreak of war, only the Germans understood the importance of concentrating all their mechanized forces in one fast-moving push for the enemy's weak points. The architect of this blitzkrieg was Heinz Guderian. His belief in tank power is summed up by his catchphrase, Nicht kleckern, klotzen. Don't tickle, smash.
The Germans used tanks in concentration. They were used at the point of a spear instead of being spread out along the front.
Guderian was aware that tanks on their own would be vulnerable to Allied counterattack. They needed close support.
The key to the blitzkrieg was the combination of armor, infantry, artillery, and the Luftwaffe with the Stuka dive bomber.
U.S. forces absorbed the lessons of 1940 and used blitzkrieg tactics in the liberation of Europe. Fast-moving tanks had to be supported by fast-moving infantry. Only infantry could deal with infantry threats. Half-tracks, jeeps, and tanks themselves carried the infantry, crucial to the tank's survival.
If you could get infantry that could move as fast as the tanks, the infantry could protect the tanks from the very dangerous infantry threats that you have lining every ditch,
They loved the tank for other purposes. They rode on the tanks all the way through dangerous areas and then would get off if the artillery fire came in, which was attracted by the tank.
We learned that when both worked together, the tank got the benefit of the infantry's ability to maneuver, and the infantry got the benefit of the tank's armored firepower.
The new cavalry-style tactics would only be possible with good communication. Tank forces racing through enemy defenses would have to talk to each other to keep their shape. Communication between tanks in the 20s and 30s harked back to the 19th century.
Some of the more ludicrous attempts were, for example, to use carrier pigeons between tanks. Obviously that didn't work very well and it wasn't used very long. One of the standard old battlefield methods being battlefield flags or semaphores, where one of the tank crewmen would try to signal to the other tanks using flags.
Communication by flags and hand signals had problems, most of them obvious.
How can you get coordinated, fast-moving, shock action type tactics when you're waving flags to tell people what to do?
The problem is, if you expose yourself, you're dead.
Something better was going to be needed for complete coordination of tank forces. Nazi weaponologists planned to use the Fuller tactical blueprint in their conquest of Europe. Blitzkrieg or lightning war would need the best tactics and the best communications. They knew that.
Tactics are much more important than whether the tank has armor this thick or that thick, or whether the machine gun has, that caliber or that caliber. Those are all minor details compared to making the right decisions and have the right skills.
Guderian's solution to the problem of coordination was the new technology of FM radio.
And it's no big surprise that the main German advocate of tank warfare, Heinz Guderian, was a signals officer. He was a radio officer. Probably the most important feature on German tanks, which made them so effective in Blitzkrieg, was not their armor, not their mobility, not their firepower, it was their radios.
Ironically, it was an American Army officer who invented the FM radio in 1934. Major Edwin Armstrong's FM sets were small enough to slip in a tank and gave a whole division multiple use of the same frequency.
By the time you get to the interwar period, you have people attempting to make them smaller, but it's not really until the mid to late 30s that they become small enough to install in tanks.
In May 1940, German forces invaded France. Within 6 weeks, French and British resistance had collapsed, and Nazi divisions were in Paris. Amazingly, the French had more tanks, bigger guns, and thicker armor. The French Char 35 was widely considered the best tank in the world. But what it didn't have was FM radio sets.
And so the Germans, with inferior numbers, inferior armor, and everything, carved through them like a hot knife through butter.
Soon, all countries cottoned on to the importance of radio communication between tanks and commanders. Everyone got better FM radios into their tanks.
Incidentally, these tanks who had intercommunication with each other, of course, so that the platoon leader could instruct a tank on his left, enemy tank approaching on your left flank. Give him help.
Lives depended on the ability of commanders to communicate directly with their crews, even over the noise of a 35-ton monster and the boom of tank-on-tank combat.
Combat is a very, very complex situation. The tank commander is so busy with his binoculars trying to check the enemy out. He's trying to hold on when the tank is rocking back and forth across a ditch. And when you get a command from the battalion commander saying, "Lieutenant, you're going to lose your stripes," or whatever it is, your bars, if you don't get your tank out of there now. And they don't want to end up in a ditch. They don't want to end up with their belly full of lead. So that the throat mic and the earplugs that each of the crew members had was pretty good and could overcome the noise.
If you've watched the video, you can complete your first task in your workbook. Your second task, we'll look at how were Poland and France affected. So you're going to open the document Blitzkrieg in Poland and France. You're going to read the information, and in your workbook, answer the questions if you're doing developing. If you're doing secured, you're going to complete the developing and explain which country you think was affected the worst. If you're doing mastered, you're then going to explain why taking over all this land was so important to Hitler. So you can pause and complete task 2. Task 3, we're going to look at why was Blitzkrieg a success. So you're going to do a diamond 9. So if you're doing developing, you're going to complete your diamond 9 and justify your top and bottom. So the top is the most important reason it succeeded to the least. To secured, you're going to complete developing and then rate out of 10 how effective you think Blitzkrieg was overall and justify. Mastered, you're going to create a plan and write a conclusion for the question, Blitzkrieg succeeded because of the Allies' mistakes. How far do you agree? So you're going to create a plan for the first 3 paragraphs and then write a conclusion. Here are the reasons for your diamond. You can pause and complete task 3. So that is the end of your second lesson this week. So what you need to upload is your video task, your comprehension questions, and your diamond 9. And for each one, state whether you've completed developing, secured, or mastered. Well